cast director, after a couple amateur shows there, took me into New York, and he said I should start studying dramatics. So he took me in there to meet somebody, and they immediately sent me to the Alvin Theater. And I got up on the stage there. I didn't know what I was doing.
Lee Van Cleef was Hollywood's toughest villain, with eyes that could freeze a room. But behind that legendary stare lived a man who could barely stand. For 15 years, he fought a battle no one talked about. His son stayed quiet until 2024, when he finally broke the silence and confirmed what fans had whispered for decades. The drinking, the pain, the fear that never left him, and the real reason he almost quit acting in 1962. Today, we're uncovering the truth about the man who played Angel Eyes, but lived like someone was always watching. Lee Van Cleef entered the world on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, with a face people remembered even when he was still a small boy. There was something sharp in his features and something steady in his eyes. Photos from his childhood show a kid who looked older than his age, almost as if life had carved lines across him before he ever earned them. His parents came from Dutch-American roots. His father worked as a pharmacist, and his mother played piano with the grace of someone who lived more in music than in noise. Their life was modest, and they moved often, and each move left young Lee feeling like he was walking into rooms where he did not quite belong. This sense of being outside everything stayed with him, shaping his quiet personality and the stillness that later made him magnetic on screen. He grew up liking numbers and spent time thinking he might become an accountant. He studied it, worked at it, and tried to settle into a life that felt steady. But the world was shifting, and by September 1942, he entered the U.S. Navy at only 17. Basic training came first, then Sonarman School, where he learned to listen for danger hidden beneath the sea. By 1943, he found himself aboard the submarine chaser USS SC-681, sweeping Caribbean waters and tracking German U-boats under skies that felt huge and heavy. The ship moved through tense areas around Cuba and Jamaica for close to 10 months, and each patrol carried the same quiet threat. In Key West, he earned promotion to Sonarman Second Class and trained at the Fleet Sound School, sharpening his hearing until he could read the sea through sound. Then came the minesweeper USS Incredible, the ship that pulled him into even deeper danger. During the southern France landings in August 1944, the ship cleared mines ahead of Allied fleets, sailing into areas where one wrong move could destroy everyone aboard. In September 1944, the crew dealt with German human torpedoes, and his alertness helped them survive the attack. His courage earned him the Bronze Star, a rare honor for someone in his position. Soon after, the ship headed to the Black Sea and anchored in Sevastopol, facing icy winds and waters filled with hidden mines. Sometimes the ocean froze around them in sheets. Other times, the air-sea patrols demanded they pull downed pilots out of rough waves. Every day felt like a test. The long hours spent listening for faint pings in total darkness taught him patience and focus. It taught him a stillness that later turned into one of his greatest strengths as an actor. Fellow sailors said he never panicked, not even when mines exploded close enough to shake the deck. That calm settled deep into him and shaped the look he carried for the rest of his life. When he left the Navy in February 1946, he found the world too quiet. Civilian life moved slowly after years of danger. He tried accounting again. He worked on farms. He took small jobs and waited for something to pull him forward. He felt restless, almost hollow, like the war had taken parts of him that regular work could never replace. Then a friend pushed him to audition for a small theater group in Clinton in 1948. He had no training, but the moment he stepped under the lights, something clicked. The crowd saw that angular face and tall frame, and they listened without him forcing anything. He got the lead role in Our Town, and that performance carried him to New York, where he joined the Broadway cast of Mr. Roberts with Henry Fonda. Directors noticed him fast. It was not technique, it was presence, pure and simple. He filled a stage just by standing there. Stanley Kramer saw him during a performance and felt that same pull. Kramer was searching for fresh faces for his upcoming film, High Noon. When Van Cleef auditioned, the studio executive took one look at his hooked nose and actually suggested surgery. Van Cleef refused, and the main role went to someone else. But he still got cast in the movie, and something surprising happened. He was given a silent role, not a single line. Yet viewers remembered him, his face, his stance, his steady glare. He played Jack Colby, one of Frank Miller's gang, and all he had to do was exist on screen for people to feel uneasy. This one silent performance became the beginning of his typecasting. Hollywood looked at him and saw the villain they had been waiting for. The 1950s swept him into one outlaw role after another. He worked constantly. Kansas City Confidential in 1952, The Lawless Breed in 1953, The Big Combo in 1955. Directors wanted that face on their posters, and his roles kept coming. In 1957, he appeared in more than 10 films. The work paid well, but the freedom was thin. Everyone wanted the bad guy, and no one wanted to imagine he could be anything else. The box he lived in kept getting smaller, and though he kept acting, he sometimes wondered if he would ever break out of it. Then came the accident in 1958, while he was building a playhouse for his daughter. He lost the last joint of his right middle finger, and the injury started rumors he never bothered to correct. Instead, he leaned into it. Directors framed shots to show the missing fingertip. It added to the menace. It added to the legend. In The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966, that detail became part of his character's unsettling edge. What began as an accident turned into something iconic. That was the strange magic of his life. Misfortune kept becoming fuel. Lee Van Cleef moved through the late 1950s like a man running from something he could never quite name. Work came fast, but it never came easy. In 1957 alone, he pushed through 7 films, slipping into one snarling role after another. Gunfight at the OK Corral hit theaters on May 1st, where he showed up as Ed Bailey. 3 weeks later, on May 22nd, he was Majnun Cham in China Gate. By October 23rd, he appeared again in The Tin Star as Ed McGaffey. And the list kept growing with Raiders of Old California, The Lonely Man, The Quiet Gun, and then another turn in The Young Lions in 1958. It felt endless, and TV kept pulling him in too. He stepped into Tales of Wells Fargo as Cherokee Bob on February 18, 1957. Then into Richard Diamond Private Detective in 1958 as Ed Murdoch. And before that, he had done Annie Oakley twice in 1955. Brave Eagle, Adventures of Champion, Cimarron City, Episode 25 in 1959, and many more floated through his life. He earned $500 a week, the same rate he first saw back in 1952 after High Noon. Years passed, roles stacked up, but the pay barely moved. He was working himself raw for scraps. Studios trusted him in only one narrow way. They knew he could sneer, glare, and look dangerous. Universal and United Artists kept him trapped inside that box. Universal tossed him into low-budget westerns like The Vanishing American in 1955 as J. Lord and Accused of Murder in 1956 as Surrend. Emmett Lackey. United Artists tied him into Machete in December 1958. He carried the same piercing eyes and edge that caught attention in High Noon back in 1952, even though he never spoke a line in it. Funny thing is, he was almost a deputy in that film. But Stanley Kramer tried to get him to soften his face through nose surgery. Lee said no. That refusal pushed him down to a mute henchman named Jack Colby. And after his car crash in the late 50s, studios tightened their grip even more. They gave him crumbs like First Sergeant Rickett in The Young Lions. No one imagined him doing anything except standing in the shadows. His work in noir films like Kansas City Confidential in 1952 showed what he could do, but no one wanted to see beyond the villain mask. It kept him stuck. The work ate at his body day after day. Long rides on stiff saddles, falls onto cold dirt, and endless retakes on rough sets left him limping more nights than he cared to admit. In Gunfight at the OK Corral, he spent hours choking on lone pine dust while throwing himself into saloon fights without pads. Raiders of Old California had him racing across bareback horses as Sergeant Pardee. The quiet gun made him tumble onto stony ground again and again. And when he filmed It Conquered the World in 1956, there was no stunt double. He had to do his own leaps and jumps. He carried Navy injuries from his time on the USS Incredible until 1946, but B-Western schedules did not care. Boots rubbed his feet raw. His back flared from twisting in saddles. TV shoots were no kinder. On Range Rider in 1951, he fought on horseback minutes after stepping onto set. No medics, no rest, only the next call. Every day felt like a step closer to something breaking. Inside, he carried a slow burn. People cheered his villains and hissed at his face, even when he wore a tux. But no one asked who he wanted to become. High Noon in 1952 locked his reputation. Crowds saw beady eyes and sneer, not a working actor with stage training from Mr. Roberts' tours in 1950 and 1951, or the discipline the Navy had carved into him from 1942 to 1946. By 1957, he knew roles like Ed Bailey in Gunfight at the OK Corral would kill him off halfway through the story. That pattern hurt him more than he said out loud. He did admit one thing. Bad guys were always his bag because audiences hated him on sight. Behind that joke sat real pain. He had acted in almost 90 films, and most of them handed him 3 minutes of screen time before someone gunned him down. After the crash in 1958, he slipped into deeper trouble. Money dried up. He painted houses to survive. His wife Joan worked an IBM office job. Bills piled onto the table. Booze rumors followed him. His marriage to Patsy, the one he began in 1945, shattered in 1960 after 15 years, and 3 children named Alan, Deborah, and David. Rejection rotted him from the inside. Then came the night everything split open. Fall 1958, a twisty California road. His family packed into the car after ride-lonesome work in Lone Pine. A truck came out of nowhere. The crash smashed his world in seconds. His left arm broke in 2 places. His kneecap turned to fragments. Ligaments tore like paper. He was 33 and trapped in a hospital bed for a month, staring at a future that terrified him. Doctors said the limp would be permanent. They said he would never ride a horse again. For a Western actor, that felt like a death sentence. He fought back with raw stubbornness. Therapy sessions left him shaking from pain. He forced his knee to bend when it refused. He pushed past the agony because the alternative was giving up. Within 6 months, he climbed back on a horse, even though doctors warned him not to. It was a small victory, but it came at a price. The crash cracked more than bone. It cracked his home life. By 1960, the marriage was gone. Bills dragged him down again. He could barely find work. It marked one of the lowest stretches of his life. The pain stayed with him for decades. It followed him through long shoots, through night walks to the trailer, through scenes that needed stuntmen because his leg could not take it. When he filmed For a Few Dollars More in 1965, many rugged moments needed doubles. Yet he still rose higher than ever, even while he hid that constant ache. People loved the tough image, never knowing how fragile he felt each morning. The injury shaped every day until he died on December 16, 1989, from heart issues that came with age and strain. Beneath the surface, another battle brewed. After the crash on August 19, 1959, when another tree collision repeated his earlier nightmare, his pain deepened. His body felt like a prison. He leaned on alcohol to take the edge off. The fear of losing his career, the humiliation of needing help, the sadness of a broken marriage, all of it pushed him closer to the bottle. That struggle lasted around 15 years. Even a new marriage could not quiet it. Smoking clung to him too. He picked up a pipe in the Navy and never put it down. Cigarettes followed him everywhere. It became part of his image and his escape. Decades of smoke scarred his lungs. Bronchitis and emphysema chased him. Lung cancer later became a shadow over his final years. When his son spoke years later, he confirmed what people only whispered. The addiction stories were true. Van Cleef carried deep pain, old regrets, and memories of roles he lost. He hid it behind a serious face and a steady voice, yet he fought himself every day. His screen presence felt fearless, but inside he was dealing with fear, frustration, and disappointment. He kept these battles quiet because that was the only way he knew how to survive. It makes his story feel heavier and more human. The man people saw on screen was all steel, but the man at home was tired, hurting, and trying to keep moving forward. By the early 1960s, Lee Van Cleef felt like he was slipping through a crack he might never crawl out of. Money was tight. Bills piled up. Some weeks he took whatever small TV roles he could find. Other weeks he survived on office work just to keep the lights on. The worst blow came in 1959 when a car accident crushed his knee, and doctors told him he would never ride a horse again. For a Western actor, that felt like someone had slammed the door right in his face. The pain stayed with him, and so did the fear. He even admitted later that he thought about leaving acting behind and giving his time to painting. He loved painting. It felt safer than rejection. His last real movie credit was a tiny villain role in 1962 in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and after that, his name drifted so far off the Hollywood map that even he wondered if he had already become a memory. Then, something shifted. It came from a place he never expected. Sergio Leone had started searching for someone who looked dangerous, someone who could stand opposite Clint Eastwood in For a Few Dollars More in 1965 and truly feel like a match. Leone remembered Lee from older films like High Noon and Gunfight at the OK Corral. He remembered the sharpness in his face and the cold quiet he carried on screen. So he went looking for him. He found him. And he offered him the role of Colonel Mortimer with a paycheck of $17,000. For Lee, who had been earning only $500 a week before this, that number almost felt unreal. He took the part without stopping to think too long. Later, he said he had no idea that one decision would change the entire rhythm of his life. Once For a Few Dollars. More hit theaters. Everything opened up. Audiences in Europe were drawn to him right away. They loved the way he moved, the way his eyes told you he knew more than he spoke. He was not fully good and not fully bad. He was simply a man with purpose, and people felt that. His partnership with Clint Eastwood suddenly became something larger than a film pairing. It felt legendary. For the first time in his career, Lee Van Cleef was not the background villain. He was the co-lead. That wave carried him into the late 1960s and 1970s, where he became one of the most recognizable faces in spaghetti westerns. He never expected that kind of second life. Yet it came, and it carried him farther than he ever imagined. Then, the good, the bad, and the ugly arrived in 1966, and with it came the role that locked his place in cinema forever. Angel Eyes, cold, calculating, a man whose smile worked like a warning. The film earned more than $38 million worldwide, and suddenly his face was everywhere. Posters, magazines, newspaper covers. People who had ignored him for years were now speaking his name, like he had been a legend all along. Still, behind that rising fame lived a man who did not trust any of it. In interviews, he shared that he always looked over his shoulder. He kept painting. He kept wondering if this success was something solid or something that could vanish in a moment the way it had before. After spaghetti westerns exploded in 1964, Europe could not get enough of actors who looked like they had survived a dozen lives. That was Lee. Between 1966 and 1969, he appeared in films like The Big Gun Down, Day of Anger, and Sabata. Most were shot on tight budgets in Spain or Italy, but they pulled huge crowds across the continent. In 1968, nearly one-third of all Italian films were westerns, and Lee stood at the center of that rush. He became the anti-hero people rooted for, even when they did not understand him. It was strange to see a man Hollywood had once tossed aside suddenly treated like royalty in Europe. But he welcomed it. It kept him working. It gave him purpose again. Yet beneath the leather coat and the sharp glare was a body that refused to forget the past. His knee never healed right after the 1959 crash. Every step hurt. Every long day on a horse felt like a test. Still, he pushed through the pain. Directors often said they never heard him complain. He moved through rocky sets in brutal heat the same way he moved through life, quiet and determined. That silent strength made him a legend among crews. He just did the work. He held his pain the way other men held secrets. As his career moved through different years, he drifted into other genres. Science fiction in the 1950s with Flight to Mars. Martial arts films in the 1980s like The Octagon. Action thrillers like Escape from New York in 1981 with John Carpenter. Some critics rolled their eyes at these B-movies, but Lee never cared. He accepted roles to keep working and to take care of his family. His craft mattered more than reviews. His survival mattered even more. That willingness to adapt kept him afloat, while many others faded. European fans never turned away from him. Even in his later films, theaters filled up because his name alone promised something familiar, something tough, something cool. Posters with his face sold out. They saw his journey from a silent gunman in High Noon in 1952 to a layered bounty hunter in For a Few Dollars More in 1965, to the scarred Captain Hawk in Escape from New York in 1981. They saw the arc clearly. They saw how he changed while still holding on to the same quiet core. His real life carried just as many twists. He married Patsy Ruth Cale on December 10, 1943, when he was just 18. They had 3 children together, Alan in 1947, then Deborah and David. But by 1958, the marriage had cracked under pressure. The accident, the money issues, the drinking that grew out of the pain. Everything piled up until they finally split apart. That divorce marked a heavy shift inside him. Friends said that was when he began carrying a darker weight. 2 years later, on April 9, 1960, he married Joan Marjorie Drain. He adopted her daughter Denise and tried to rebuild his life as he tried to rebuild his career. He did interior decorating. He painted. He auditioned again and again. Joan stood by him, but the stress never eased. When work came, he was gone. When work left, fear returned. In 1974, they ended their 14-year marriage, leaving behind another set of bruises he hid under his quiet stare. Then, something gentler found him. In 1974, while filming The Stranger and the Gunfighter, he met Barbara Havalone, a concert pianist with a calm spirit. They married in 1976 and settled in Oxnard, California. With her, he found the first real peace he had ever known. She supported him through fading roles and growing health problems. She stayed until the end in 1989. Those who visited them said he was softer in those years. He let people in. He allowed himself to feel safe again. Still, deep inside, he carried a fear he could never shake. His son Alan spoke about it. Friends spoke about it. They said he was always afraid of being forgotten, always afraid the work would stop, always afraid he would slip back into the darkness that once almost swallowed him. Some directors struggled with him because those fears sometimes made him distant or difficult. He drank more in his later years. He fought his own shadows. Behind the famous stare was a man who often felt small and breakable. By the late 1970s, his heart began to fail. Doctors warned him. They told him to slow down. In the early 1980s, he needed a pacemaker. Even that did not make him retire. He acted in The Master in 1984 and took whatever roles he could manage. He worked through fatigue the same way he worked through knee pain, quietly, without complaint. He did not know how to stop. On December 16, 1989, just 19 days before his 65th birthday, Lee Van Cleef died at home in Oxnard. He was 64. A heart attack took him, and throat cancer weighed heavily as a contributing factor. He had smoked his whole life, and the damage stayed with him. He collapsed suddenly and could not be revived at St. John's Hospital. Fans across the world felt a strange ache, as if the tough man who never bent had suddenly vanished into thin air. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, in the Courts of Remembrance. His grave reads, "Best of the Bad." People smile when they see it. They know the line fits his screen image. They also know he spent his life trying to be something better than the roles he played. His grave has become a quiet stop for those who loved Westerns and for those who saw something deeper in his tired eyes.